Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Germany's defence minister says the EU must tighten the screw of sanctions on Russia amid pressure for a ceasefire with Ukraine. NATO chief Mark Rutte says it is crucial that the US consult with European and Ukrainian leaders after Trump spoke with both Putin and Zelensky over a ceasefire. The UN humanitarian chief has told the BBC that 14,000 babies could die in Gaza in 48 hours if more aid doesn't reach them. 5 aid trucks have entered Gaza after an 11-week blockade, as British, French and Canadian leaders condemn Israel's offensive and blockades. Taiwanese President Ching-te has reiterated willingness to speak with China. Speaking on his year anniversary of taking charge, the Taiwanese leader did vow to strengthen defences as Chinese vessels were reported by Taiwan around the self-governed territory this morning. Indian authorities have arrested 11 citizens for allegedly spying for Pakistan following the most serious conflict between the countries in decades, spanning Punjab, Haryana and Uttar Pradesh. The arrests include a YouTuber and a businessman. A New York court has heard that Sean Diddy Combs allegedly used a hammer to break into his ex-girlfriend's apartment before a security tape of him assaulting Cassie Ventura was shown to the jury. Combs, on trial for offences including sex trafficking, denies all the charges. The US Department of Health and Human Services has terminated $60 million in federal grants to Harvard University. The Ivy League institution is accused of failing to address anti-Semitic harassment and ethnic discrimination on campus. The US Supreme Court has let the Trump administration end temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans. Granted by the Biden administration, this ruling could allow Trump to ramp up deportations. Finance leaders from the G7 nations have begun meetings in Canada in the midst of growing uncertainty on the Russia-Ukraine war and Trump's trade tariffs. Ukrainian Finance Minister Serhiy Marchenko is also attending in an unusual G7 summit. In the latest development, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said all efforts for peace are welcome, and China voiced support for direct talks between Russia and Ukraine after Trump's call. German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius said that Putin is not genuinely seeking peace in Ukraine. He accused Russia of using talks with the US to buy time. Pistorius urged the EU to ramp up sanctions, particularly on Russian energy. Meanwhile, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas urged the US to take strong action if Russia rejects a Ukraine ceasefire. She emphasised the need for consequences, citing earlier US warnings. Kallas made the remarks at an EU ministers' meeting in Brussels. This comes amid US President Donald Trump after he said a call with Vladimir Putin that Russia and Ukraine would begin immediate ceasefire talks, though the Kremlin noted the process would take time. Trump briefed EU leaders and President Zelensky, who confirmed Kyiv's openness to direct talks in any format, suggesting a high-level meeting possibly hosted by Turkey, Switzerland or the Vatican. Putin thanked Trump for supporting renewed dialogue but rejected a 30-day truce without conditions. The Kremlin said no timeline was agreed and discussions remain complex. Despite pressure from Europe, Trump declined new sanctions on Russia, citing a fragile process. Critics, including former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt, said Putin gained time to keep fighting while stalling negotiations. Trump warned he may withdraw if talks fail, saying, "This is not my war." Meanwhile, Russia insists on Ukrainian withdrawal from the 4 occupied regions. Heading over to North America now, the US Supreme Court has cleared the way for the Trump administration to end deportation protections. This move will affect nearly 350,000 Venezuelans living in the United States under temporary protected status, also known as TPS. The program, initially extended by President Joe Biden, had given Venezuelans a legal shield from deportation and the right to work. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem had moved to cancel this Biden-era 2023 extension of the program, arguing that the current administration must have flexibility in immigration policy. The bid to end TPS comes as Trump, who returned to office in January, pushes for mass deportations and has repeatedly vowed to strip migrants of temporary legal protections. Moving on now, in the wake of Operation Sindoor, India is sending 7 all-party delegations to 23 countries, including key stops at the European Union headquarters in Belgium and United Nations Security Council members to deliver a clear message: zero tolerance for terrorism. The centre has released the full list of delegates, comprising 59 members, including 31 from the ruling NDA and 20 from the opposition parties, supported by former diplomats. Each delegation will be led by a senior political figure, including BJP's Baidyanath J. Banda and Ravi Shankar Prasad, JDU's Sanjay JHA, Shiv Sena's Srikant Jinder, and Congress's Shashi Tharoor, DMK's Kanimozi Karanuddi, and NCP's Supriya Sule. These outreach efforts follow the deadly Pahalgam terror attacks and signal India's determination to mobilise global backing against cross-border terror. Speaking on the situation, JP Singh confirmed that the ceasefire is still holding, but emphasised that Operation Sindoor is paused and not over. Moving on now to the Middle East, Israel is facing growing international pressure over its continued military operations in Gaza and the blocking of aid, with leading Western nations warning of consequences. France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has said Israel's easing of humanitarian aid access is totally insufficient, calling instead for immediate and massive assistance to Gaza's civilians. Barrot also said France is determined to recognise a Palestinian state and is actively working towards that goal. Let's have a listen to what the French Foreign Minister said.
C'est tout à fait insuffisant. Certes, ça fait bientôt 3 mois que l'armée israélienne bloquait l'accès de toute aide humanitaire à Gaza, si bien que les Gazaouis, les enfants de Gaza étaient affamés, étaient assoiffés, et que pour des raisons, notamment de politique intérieure, le gouvernement israélien a décidé de réouvrir, d'entrouvrir la porte. Mais c'est totalement insuffisant, ça l'était déjà. Aveugle, le blocage de l'aide humanitaire par le gouvernement israélien ont fait de Gaza un mouroir, pour ne pas dire un cimetière. Et que cela doit cesser parce que chacun s'en rend compte, c'est une atteinte profonde à la dignité de la personne humaine, c'est une violation absolue de toutes les règles du droit international et c'est contraire à la sécurité d'Israël, à laquelle la France est attachée, parce que qui sème la violence?
Well, this warning came a day after the leaders of the United Kingdom, Canada and France issued a joint statement threatening concrete actions against Israel if it does not stop its offensive and allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Since midnight, at least 60 people have reportedly been killed in Israeli strikes across Gaza as the military expands its ground and air assault. Gaza's death toll has now surpassed 53,000 people, according to the local health authorities. Let's have a listen to some of those who have been displaced in Gaza.
صحينا في الليل على صوت القصف، جينا نشوف عيلة بالكامل مسحت من التاريخ السجل المدني، والزلمة هذا قبل هيك أهله كلهم راحوا، وهي هالوقت هو لحقهم، ما ضلش ولا أحد منكم.
هذه محطة الوقود فيها تقريبا كانت عائلة ناجحة وعائلتين. هذول العائلات في شهداء لقيت منهم بيطلع 15 شهيد، منهم طلع ومنهم ضايل تحت القدم.
Meanwhile, Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani also slammed Israel's military campaign, saying it has undermined any potential chance for peace. Let's have a listen to the Qatari Prime Minister.
مرارا كيف تجهض فرص التهدئة. فعندما تم إطلاق سراح الجندي الإسرائيلي الأمريكي عيدان ألكسندر، ظننا أن تلك اللحظة ستفتح بابا لوقف هذه المأساة، إلا أن الرد كان بموجة قصف أشد عنفا أودت بحياة مئات الأبرياء. هذا السلوك العدواني غير المسؤول يقوض كل فرصة.
In a related development, the UN's top humanitarian official Tom Fletcher issued a grim warning, saying that 14,000 babies in Gaza will die in the next 48 hours if urgent aid supplies do not reach them. Heading away now and to Taiwan, where their president Ching-te marked 1 year in office today with a firm message. Lai said, while Taiwan seeks peace and dialogue with China, it must remain strong and prepared. Speaking in Taipei, Lai also said Taiwan's people love peace, but warned against dreams or illusions about Beijing's intentions. Peace is priceless and war has no winners, he said. But to preserve peace, we must be ready. Lai, whom Beijing brands a separatist, has repeatedly offered talks, but China continues to reject them and insists Taiwan is part of its territory. Lai firmly opposes that claim, stressing only Taiwan's people have the right to decide their future. He said Taiwan remains open to cooperation with China, but only if there is reciprocal dignity. We welcome dialogue over confrontation, he added. A government spokesperson last week warned China could launch military drills to mark Lai's anniversary. Let's listen in to what the leader said.
只要对等尊严，台湾很乐意跟中国进行交流合作，透过交流来取代围堵，透过对话来取代对抗，朝和平共荣的方向来发展。台湾是一个热爱和平的国家，台湾社会与人为善，我也是坚定的追求和平，因为和平无价，战争没有赢家。但是呢，我们对和平的追求固然有理想，但不能够。
Moving on now, Indian authorities have arrested nearly a dozen people across northern states for allegedly spying for Pakistan following the deadliest India-Pakistan conflict in decades. According to police, at least 11 individuals were detained in Haryana, Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, including a travel blogger, a student and a businessman. They are accused of leaking sensitive military data to Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. Punjab's police chief said 2 men were arrested for transmitting classified details about Indian military operations, including New Delhi's retaliatory strike deep into Pakistani territory earlier this month. Investigators say the suspects were recruited through social media, financial inducements and even personnel visits to Pakistan. Some reportedly maintained direct contact with Pakistani handlers. The arrests follow a violent escalation triggered by an April 22nd attack on tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir, an attack India blames on Pakistan, though Islamabad denies involvement. At least 60 people died in the subsequent fighting, which saw missile, drone and artillery strikes exchanged for 4 days before a ceasefire was agreed. This marks the most serious confrontation between the nuclear-armed rivals since the 1999 Kargil War. Authorities say investigations are ongoing and more arrests could follow. Jayoti Malhotra, a travel vlogger from Haryana accused of leaking sensitive information. Devender Singh Dhillon, a postgraduate student arrested in connection with espionage. Mohammed Tarif, a resident in Kangarka village in Mewat, Haryana, alleged to have shared sensitive military information with officials from the Pakistan High Commission. Nauman Elahi, arrested in Haryana. Investigations reveal he directed financial transactions related to the spy network. Arman, another individual arrested in Haryana, further details about his role are under investigation. Shahzad, a businessman from Moradabad, Uttar Pradesh, arrested by the Uttar Pradesh anti-terrorist squad and placed in 14-day judicial custody. Sukhpreet Singh, arrested in Gurdaspur, Punjab, for allegedly transmitting sensitive details about military operations to the ISI. Karanbar Singh, also arrested in Gurdaspur alongside Sukhpreet Singh, involved in leaking strategic information. These are just some of the suspected spies arrested in Indian territory. The US Department of Health and Human Services has announced it is terminating $60 million in federal grants to Harvard University citing the university's failure to address anti-Semitic harassment and race discrimination on campus. This comes as part of a broader effort by the Trump administration to overhaul federal funding in higher education. In recent weeks, nearly $3 billion in federal grants and contracts to Harvard have been frozen or cancelled. The administration has accused Harvard of allowing anti-Semitism to flourish and of continuing to consider ethnicity in admissions decisions. Harvard has not responded to the latest announcement, but previously stated that it cannot fully cover the financial impact of the frozen grants. The university is currently suing the Trump administration in an attempt to reverse the funding cuts. Earlier this month, Harvard settled a lawsuit with an Orthodox Jewish student who alleged the university failed to address anti-Semitism. That settlement followed the university's pledge to strengthen protections for Jewish students. We bring you some breaking news now, and in Finland, armed police are responding to a stabbing at a primary school in Pakala, Finland. The incident took place at Vahajärvi School, where 3 students were injured. Authorities say none of the injuries are life-threatening. The suspect, also a student, was taken into custody shortly after the attack. Police are now investigating reports that the victims may have been specifically targeted. The school, which has around 1,500 students, was placed on lockdown as emergency crews secured the area. Officials have not released the suspect's age or motive, and the investigation continues. Moving on now, Japan is holding firm in its demand that the United States eliminate sweeping tariffs on key exports, including cars, steel and aluminium. Speaking at a press conference, Economic Revitalization Minister Ryosei Akazawa reiterated that Japan will not rush into a trade deal that risks its national interests. This follows talks in Washington, with a third round of negotiations expected later this week. US Trade Representative Jameson Greer is expected to attend, while Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will be absent. President Trump's move to impose a 10% tariff with even higher rates on major trading partners like Japan has prompted pushback from Tokyo. Japan is considering a package of proposals to secure US concessions, including boosted imports of US agriculture and changes to auto regulations. A 24% tariff on Japanese vehicles is set to take effect in July unless a deal is reached. We head now to Africa, and clashes have erupted near Sudan's Omdurman between Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The army said the fighting is part of a large-scale offensive to drive the paramilitaries from their last positions in Khartoum state. The conflict, ongoing since April 2023, pits the Sudanese army against the Rapid Support Forces. Recent weeks have seen a sharp escalation, with multiple drone attacks by the paramilitary group. The United Nations warns these attacks threaten civilian lives and worsen the humanitarian crisis. The 2-year war has killed tens of thousands and displaced over 13 million people. Sudan's healthcare system is on the brink of collapse, with up to 90% of hospitals forced into closure. Human rights groups report horrific abuses, including sexual violence, mainly by paramilitary forces. Moving on, Australia's Conservative coalition, led by the Liberal Party and Nationals, has collapsed after a crushing election defeat earlier this month. The two right-leaning parties, which have governed together for most of the last century, traded blame over the loss. Nationals leader David Littleproud announced they would not re-enter a coalition agreement with the Liberal Party, citing disagreements on issues like nuclear energy and infrastructure funding for rural areas. The Liberal Party, the larger partner, lost over a dozen seats in the May election, with voters rejecting policies such as slashing the public service. The coalition, known as a singular force in Australian politics, has split before, but never to this extent. The move marks a seismic change in the country's political landscape and comes just weeks after a federal election that saw Labour win a second term in a landslide victory. Moving on, South Korean police have requested an arrest warrant for a journalist over a false report about former President Yoon Suk-yeol's brief martial law imposition. The journalist from Sky E Daily falsely claimed in January that 99 Chinese spies were arrested by South Korean troops during Yoon's suspension of civilian rule in December. The report cited unnamed US military sources and alleged the spies were transferred to US custody in Okinawa, Japan. Police accused the reporter of obstructing official duties of South Korea's National Election Commission, which refuted the claims. The report fueled misinformation about electoral fraud and Chinese espionage with extreme right-wing groups supporting Yoon's martial law. Pro-Yoon rallies turned violent in January, leading to jail terms for several extremists involved in assaults and property damage. To business now, and shares of Chinese electrical vehicle battery giant CATL surged as much as 18.4% above their subscription price after the company raised $4.6 billion in its Hong Kong listing, the largest offering in the world this year. The deal brings total funds raised in Hong Kong through listings this year to $7.73 billion, a significant jump from the $1.05 billion in the same period last year. CATL plans to use most of the funds to build a battery plant in Hungary aimed at supplying European automakers like BMW, Stellantis and Volkswagen. Company chairman Robin Zeng called the Hong Kong listing a new start point for the largest EV battery maker's global expansion. Let's listen in to what the founder of CATL has said.
港股上市意味着我们更加广泛地融入了全球资本市场，也是我们推动全球零碳经济的新起点。
Moving on now, El Salvadoran authorities have arrested Ruth Lopez, a human rights and anti-corruption lawyer, on embezzlement charges tied to her time as a state official. Lopez, director of anti-corruption at leading rights group Cristolas, was detained at home on the 18th of May. The Attorney General's office alleges she collaborated in the theft of state funds linked to former Electoral Tribunal President Eugenio Chicas, who is also facing charges. Cristosal condemned the arrest, calling it part of a broader campaign to criminalise human rights defenders. The group reports Lopez has been held incommunicado for over 12 hours, denying her legal access and violating due process. President Nayib Bukele's administration, frequently criticised by Cristosal, has faced accusations of co-opting the justice system during a sweeping state of emergency. Bukele, an ally of US President Donald Trump, denies wrongdoing and says his policies have restored safety in the country despite international human rights concerns.
Ruth fue detenida ilegalmente y ha estado en una situación que podría constituir una desaparición forzada de corta duración, sin que su familia o su equipo legal haya podido verla ni hablar con ella. Las autoridades lo han mantenido en completo hermetismo, negándole todo el acceso a la defensa y violando abiertamente sus derechos. La detención de Ruth no es un hecho aislado, es parte de una estrategia sistemática del gobierno de Nayib Bukele para perseguir, silenciar y criminalizar a quienes defienden derechos, combaten la corrupción y exigen la rendición.
Moving to South America now, Venezuela has suspended all flights from neighbouring Colombia following what it claims was a cross-border infiltration of mercenaries allegedly planning to sabotage this weekend's legislative and regional elections. Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello announced the move at a press conference, stating that 38 people had been arrested, including 17 foreign nationals. According to Cabello, the group intended to carry out attacks on foreign embassies, hospitals and police installations in a bid to destabilise the country ahead of the vote. Let's have a listen into what he said.
Grupos empeñados en generar violencia en nuestro país han tratado pues de acometer acciones que afectarían a los venezolanos, a las venezolanas, sin distingo de condición política, pero con el objetivo superior que tienen ellos de sabotear las elecciones del día 25. Así hemos dado instrucciones nosotros que se suspendan de manera inmediata todos los vuelos que vengan desde Colombia a Venezuela, porque la información que traemos, que tenemos, tiene que ver con este tipo de traslado de gente.
The minister linked the alleged plot to opposition figure Maria Corina Machado, who has called for a boycott of the elections. Machado, currently in hiding since the disputed July 2024 presidential election, has urged voters to stay away from the polls, claiming the process is rigged. Colombia's Civil Aviation Authority confirmed that commercial flights between the two countries had been suspended. However, the Colombian Foreign Ministry said it had not been informed in advance and was seeking clarification through diplomatic channels. The sudden flight ban has stranded passengers in Colombia. Let's have a listen to what some of them have said.
Ellos también, pero tienen que pensar también en el pueblo y la gente que está afuera. No nos dejar así a la deriva todos nosotros. No solo nosotros, hay mucha gente que está a la deriva. Y esperemos que bueno, se solucione por todo lo bien. Veremos.
Todos, la mayoría somos de tercera edad. Venimos, los hijos hacen sacrificio y todo eso, y fíjate con lo que nos encontramos. Entonces no hay alternativa.
Flight links between Caracas and Bogotá have only been restored in November 2022 following the election of Colombia's leftist president Gustavo Petro, who re-established ties that had been cut in 2019 after Colombia's former president Ivan Duque refused to recognise Maduro's re-election. The Maduro government frequently claims to be the target of coup attempts or sabotage backed by Colombia or the United States. Staying in South America, a judge in Ecuador has ruled that former Vice President Jorge Glass will stand trial for alleged embezzlement in connection with funds meant for earthquake reconstruction. The case relates to the 2016 disaster that struck Manabi and Esmeraldas provinces. Prosecutors accuse Glass of redirecting public money raised through tax increases to non-priority projects and claimed the diverted funds benefited contractors and supervisors. Glass, who was already serving time for 2 prior corruption convictions, led the reconstruction efforts during his time in office under then President Rafael Correa. His lawyer has denounced the case as politically motivated, arguing that no evidence links him to personal gain or harm to the Treasury. This latest legal chapter follows Glass's controversial arrest at the Mexican embassy in Kyoto last year, an incident that prompted Ecuador and Mexico to sever diplomatic ties. Moving on now, at the World Health Assembly, 124 countries voted in favour of a groundbreaking global treaty aimed at improving pandemic preparedness. The treaty, addressing global health inequalities, follows lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic. No countries voted against it, but 11, including Poland, Israel and Russia, abstained. WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus called the vote a step towards a safer, healthier world. The treaty will be formally adopted on Tuesday, but it won't take effect until negotiations on pathogen sharing are completed, which could take up to 2 years. After that, countries will need to ratify the accord. We move on now to bring you some breaking news. And EU member states have agreed to lift all economic sanctions on Syria to support its recovery following the ousting of President Bashar al-Assad. The decision, made by ambassadors, is expected to be officially announced by foreign ministers in Brussels today. Heading back now to North America, and in the ongoing trial of music mogul Sean Diddy Combs, new testimonies have surfaced. Cassie Ventura's former best friend, Kerry Morgan, detailed alleged abuse by Combs, including physical attacks, in 2018. Combs faces charges of sex trafficking, racketeering and abuse. His former assistant and singer, Dawn Richard, also testified, supporting claims of abuse and fears within Combs' inner circle. The prosecution aims to prove Combs led a criminal enterprise. Combs, who denies all allegations, could face up to life in prison if convicted. The trial is expected to last up to 2 months. Well, that is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.